Thank you very much, Isabel. And welcome everybody to this webinar hosted by the Centre for Innovation Management Research, part of the Centre's Debates in Public Policy. I'm, as Isabel said, Rebecca Whiting from the Department of Organisational Psychology and a recent new member to the Centre and with a research interest that incorporates social entrepreneurs. So that's my particular angle on this kind of topic. Although also interested in age and generations, so we'll see where the connections are with our topic today. So the title of today's talk is Video Gaming as a Catalyst for Learning Innovation in Gen Z Women, and our speakers are Usman Salim, founder and CEO of Liontech Studios, and Dr. Andrew Atter, founder and CEO of Pivomo, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and who's a visiting fellow with the Centre. So Usman founded Liontech Studios in 2016. It's a video game development studio based in West Yorkshire. He's gone on to create a global client base, providing games development and post-launch optimization services, and now focusing on creating educational gaming content for various age groups. Most recently, Learning Lions, a mobile game with an accompanying cartoon animation designed to teach young children the English alphabet and simple word spelling. Andrew is a board consultant. He's an executive coach and founder of Pivomo, an online social learning platform for entrepreneurial leaders and innovators. He's involved in various employment-related social enterprise projects, such as Clock Tower Project in Liverpool and Cradle to Career, a youth employment charity. He holds a professional doctorate from the Institute of Work-Based Learning at Middlesex University, and his research interests include the future of work, informal learning, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Usman and Andrew designed and published the Pivomo startup simulator game, which is designed as an educational tool for early phase entrepreneurs. And together, what they're going to be doing today is examining the extent to which gaming technology can provide a catalyst to adult learning, especially in that hard to reach demographic group named the NRS Cohort, i.e. young adults, Gen Z, in insecure employment and hard to reach through formal training and education. After they've talked, we have a discussant, Dina Mansour, who's just finishing her PhD in the Department of Management. And her thesis is looking at entrepreneurial marketing for high-tech entrepreneurs, conducting a comparative study between Egyptian and Portuguese IT startups. So without further introduction, I shall hand over to Usman and Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Isabella, and thank you also to Professor Lawton-Smith for the invitation. And I'm delighted to be present today with my colleague Usman. We will go through a series of slides to present the kind of issues and the industry backdrop. Usman will present a sort of a drill down into a case study, which I think will really help us understand some of the details of this. So we look forward to the discussion that follows, and obviously the questions and answers. So Usman, if you're ready to go, I'll sort of proceed with the slides and wait for you to jump in as we progress.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, good. So what we'd like to talk about, if we move promptly to the first introduction, the purpose of the webinar really is to highlight a field of social and technological innovation that, in our view, desperately needs further research. This was highlighted by a study I'll refer to later by the University of Oxford Internet Institute, which has just been published. But it's an area which is very fertile ground and also of major concern for public policy, with the online harms bill still working its way through the parliamentary consultation process. So it's very topical. We will try and present an industry and practitioner view of innovation that's shaping the gaming industry. There are many other perspectives that are needed on this, and we'll try and identify we see as a huge opportunity for game design and learning design to contribute to a post-COVID recovery, particularly around enhancing the employability issues of a very vulnerable group in society. So the diagram to the right really tries to show this graphically by showing you the sort of the ethical issues of gaming and the well-being and the privacy concerns that are prevalent, along with the prevalence of the industry, that it is becoming a major form of entertainment, and in some demographics actually is ahead of more conventional cable or terrestrial TV as a form of entertainment. And you've also got this dramatic technological innovation with the big five, the AI, 5G, augmented reality, and so on, which we'll refer to as we go through. So what we'll try and cover is, first of all, define this area, because there are a lot of facets to it. We'll try and identify the opportunity. We'll talk about social and learning landscapes, reflect some of the public discourse around this, and flash through some of the research literature. And then Usman will talk through the micro research project that he's done in this field. So the executive summary is that really video gaming is a huge industry and a nexus of both AI and technological changes and social changes. Gaming is poorly researched. There is a paucity of good analytical, objective research. Much of the research being done to date has relied upon self-reported questionnaires and after the fact. And this is problematic in a gaming industry reliant upon high engagement and that very animated state of mind you get in sort of gameplay. And so we need to really understand what's going on, as well as researching the motivations and underlying patterns. The gaming research actually is very mixed in this whole field around well-being and learning. There is clearly major public concern about online harms that relate to cyberbullying, dependency, to our kids spending too much time on playing games, etc., etc. And of course, that's reflected in the legislation being considered. The World Health Organization has actually declared game dependency as being a disease, and so that has obviously dramatized the public perception of the potential negative effect of gaming as being part of an online industry. I think our point, though, is that while accepting that all is being valid, and certainly that there is that to be considered, there's also probably something being missed here, which is opportunities for using gaming in very positive ways, particularly around learning. Some 32 to 40% of gamers are women, which surprises many, and I think has often been overlooked in public policy, and they also have different preferences and attitudes towards gaming. We'd like to look in particular at this cohort, the NRS cohort, often in insecure in employment or low skills, and often not in training. It's ironic, the term NRS comes from National Retraining Scheme. I think actually one of the points is that they're not in training, not in any formal training, and it may well be in employment at the small to medium-sized enterprise where they're not receiving transferable skills training. So our hypothesis underlying this presentation is that gaming delivers potentially a tacit learning experience to NRS adults with significantly unexplored potential. So moving on, I just want to quickly define what we mean by gaming and crudely put two baskets out. We're not talking here about, for example, game-based learning in classrooms or learning apps or e-learning platforms, MOOCs, etc., which may well use gamified effects in learning, but we're not talking about that specifically because it already suggests someone is demonstrating volition towards learning. And there may be opportunities to increase the element of gamification and animation, for example, in those fields, but that's not a particular concern. We want to focus very much on the gaming industry itself and look at, for example, problem-solving games, multiplayer games, hyper-casual games, and so on. So, for example, Minecraft being a good example, so a popular game, very much around problem solving, creating creative play, and so on. That would be a good example. One of the early exponents of this idea was Dr. Jane McGonigal, a West Coast game developer, and I won't read all that, but essentially she's highlighting the fact that gaming is providing certain demographics things that the reality is not, and she explored this thesis in her book, Reality is Broken. In other words, gaming is providing inspiration, engagement, learning, and promoting self-efficacy in ways that other forms of experience aren't. So this is a, not everyone accepts that thesis, but that was set out in 2011, and sort of is an intriguing idea and led on to further research in this area. Won't go into the detail of this, but what we'd just like to do is highlight the pattern here of, if you look at the colours, what we wanted to show here was the red mobile gaming expanding as a key part of the gaming industry. We also wanted to highlight the fact that gaming is now comprising or driven by AI technologies, big data technologies, streaming, and so on. 5G, of course, is accelerating the whole process and making games much more accessible on mobile devices to a much wider group of people around the world.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that, Andrew, as well. If you just pop back.
Yeah, sure.
The number of gamers has increased so much, and of course, if you look, the revenues have increased greatly as well. It's almost like everybody's a gamer now. So even my parents are gamers. There's kind of a game for everyone, and the revenues reflect that. But also, I think with the wide range of popular mobile phones as well, something to consider is the introduction of augmented reality and AR, which is also an emerging tech which has become so much more accessible now as well. So it'll be interesting in the next few years. We probably see the curve continue to be as steep as it is. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks, Usman. Thank you. So just some very quick hits here through the data. This is US data provided by Quantic. What seems to be the case is that women have very different preferences for games. So this is, if you look at this chart here, games, so this is the percentage of, so we get this right, this is the percentage, the gender mix within a game. So in other words, 69% of the people who play match 3 are women, and not 69% of women play match 3. So that's just to clarify that. But what it does show is if you look at the popular games, or the games in which there is a high level of participation of women, seem to point to a type of game that we might describe as creative, problem solving, learning orientated, and so on. So RPG, role-playing game would be a good example of this. If you look down at the bottom, some of the terms like sort of tactical shooter, first-person shooter, etc., are some of the more violent games that we would associate with perhaps some of the negative aspects of gaming. Now, we don't know what, there's some obviously big questions around what's driving that motivation and preference. Is it pure volition? Is it social conditioning? Is it that they are being required to do so by, under social influences, or they're being marketed to by the gaming industry in those ways? That's where some of the research gets a bit fuzzy, and obviously needs to be explored further. A complicated chart, but I just want to show you down here. This is again US data from the Entertainment Software Association. If you just down the lower bottom left here, you can see that a high percentage, 77% of women play games on mobile phones in that demographic, 18 to 34, and also have a high preference for hyper casual games that you download, play, discard quite quickly. So, the important thing is that, and if you compare that to men who play more complex, heavy bandwidth games on consoles, where there's 75%. So there are differences in user patterns. Finally, this, again, Quantic data, so showing what are the primary motivations. So why do, what determines the choice of female gamers? Why do they play? So this data, according to Quantic, which is 2017 data, based on a 2016 study, but published in 2017, So completion games, so games that require you to go through from A to B and pick up points, badges, equipment, or whatever it is, and you complete various tasks. Fantasy games and design games. So you can see these are pointing to areas where their natural preferences or the game preferences of females point to potential learning opportunities. If you contrast that to male gamers, you see a different story where it is, the primary motivation is competition and destruction. And you've got this glorious quote here from Quantic, which I'm sure many of you will enjoy, that the most common primary motivations for men are competition and destruction. So we'll leave that hanging in the air and move on quickly. So there is a changing industry landscape, and back to this idea that potentially gaming can add value or open up possible social goods as opposed to online harms. First of all, we're seeing rising number of female representations in games themselves. There's a general recognition that there are too few female game developers. So about 20% of developers are female, which is not the lowest compared to other occupational groups, one has to say, but is obviously underrepresentation, and one assumes it would clearly make a difference if more women were actually developing games. And potentially we could see an opportunity to provide a career route from those who are immersed in gaming, potentially to become game developers themselves, possibly. So there's also a move to make sure that gaming tackles more socially progressive agendas around mental health and diversity and so on. And there are already significant female role models being presented in the gaming industry. We'll move on. There's major public concern, obviously, around the ethical landscape, which I'll move on. And this is in the public domain. Many of you will have seen The Social Dilemma, a significant Netflix publication, which of course addresses gaming and the notion of dependency. Going to move on. The backdrop of this is a learning landscape in which there are already, and many of you of course will know this in CIMR, that there is a delta between the females leaving school with STEM qualifications versus males. And in this, we're talking about the NRS demographic, this Gen Z demographic. In that particular demographic, that delta is amplified, not compressed. So in other words, through their work, involvement in work, they don't tend to get training or advancement or in-work courses or promotions and other things that might open or make STEM technologies accessible. So we're dealing with a population that is actually often cut adrift from some of the emerging technologies, ironically, which they are using to a great extent on their mobile phones. Moving on, the NRS cohort was defined in the National Retraining Scheme back in 2017. As I say, it's potentially a misnomer to call it retraining. Obviously, that's the intent. But in the 2017 document, there was reference made to the ability to use a device. So in other words, it was a sense of, we need to reconsider education and think differently about, it's not a one-size-fits-all, that there are, it's outside the classroom, it's on devices, it's using media and more accessible platforms. So that was identified in 2017. I think there's still a way to go before we actually kind of embrace that thinking and work out more strategically as public policy and how we advance that so we can reach this population. We also need to think about adult learning in broader terms. Obviously, it's not just about employability, and that is obviously a very key part of the social concerns, but there is citizenship, life events, social attachment, and sort of crucially mental health and well-being. Interestingly, the Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reached out to non-registered voters in the US elections recently and reached 400,000 people. 400,000 young people who are avid gamers. So, it highlights the potential for creative thinking in this area. Another aspect of the learning landscape is recognizing the things that the gaming industry is getting right, which we as learning designers need to emphasize and embrace very strongly. So the idea that so persistence and growth in skills, confidence, knowledge, tactics, these games apply well-worn models of ramping up player achievement and teaching us how to succeed. So this leads into things like agency, identity, self-efficacy, volition, and those things which are used very effectively by game designers and can be used in very positive ways. They can obviously also be manipulated and used in very negative ways, hence the public concern. What the research tells us is that there are cognitive abilities that can be enhanced through memory. There's a reference there I'll leave you to read on that, so it can enhance memory. There's a recent publication by Cohort, which is looking at well-being and motivation. Again, much of this research based on a self-reported questionnaire. So it's there, it's qualitative, it's subjective research. Recently, in 2020, the University of Oxford Internet Institute puts out this research paper, which looked at basically saying there's nowhere near a consensus on evidence-based policy, that much of the research was self-reported behaviour, and self-reported behaviour is a poor predictor of actual behaviour. They highlighted, for example, that there was a tendency to over-report the amount of gameplay that was actually being used. So, in fact, the gamers played less than they actually reported, which is odd and needs explanation. So the important thing about this study is it was one of the first studies that actually used the gamers' feedback together with game telemetrics. So in other words, real-time metrics, and to put those two together, so providing a much more in-the-moment real picture. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Usman now to take you through this study he's done, which picks that theme up and it can take you into more details, specifics on that point.
Yes, thank you for that, Usman. So here's a micro research piece that I did for my own personal practice for my studio regarding user data privacy in mobile apps. So at the moment, there's something really interesting happening in the industry. It's more concerning the free gaming apps, which you see on the stores. So for years, these apps have been free and they generate income through advertisements, which are shown in the app. And ads tend to pay more and earn more for developers, the more targeted these ads are. So this has led to privacy concerns amongst users, and hence the GDPR laws, which I'm sure some of you are aware of, were brought in to limit the outside of app tracking, if you like. However, there's still quite a lot of tracking which goes on in-app. So if you were to look at the diagram, things like the device ID, which is a unique number which is specific to your ID, whether you have iOS or whether you have Android, and it's almost like somebody having an ID number which is your name, and then all the data points they collect is linked to that device ID. So there's growing concerns about things like this, and also session lengths and session frequency. These are more metrics that publishers look at. So when a publisher is testing an app or a game to bring to market, they usually look at the day 1 and the day 7 retention. And if the day 1's not 45% and the day 7's not 13%, it's not really worth the marketing spend to be profitable. So these things seem to be essential in the industry for publishers. So we have things like user performance as well, which helps refine a product. So for example, if in a gaming app there was a huge drop off at around level 3, that would tell you level 3 is too hard, so you need to work on it, and things like that. It just helps the users the developers, make a much more polished product. So here we have something very interesting that's happening in the field now at the moment, and it's happening in real time. So in the coming weeks and months, we'll know more about this. Apple has actually introduced something called the RDFA Rules, which is the unique number I mentioned earlier, the device ID. It's not allowing access anymore to developers or to advertisers to this number, so they can't track user activity and serve targeted ads. So the advertisers must meet these new requirements as well. So something we see in the industry at the moment is Apple and Google are the two companies who have the majority of the market share, and Google is not expected to follow in the suit, in Apple's suit, sorry. So as Google have their own ad network and they benefit directly from this, whereas Apple doesn't have an ad network, and they're kind of battling against that. So they seem to be more concerned than the other. So as I mentioned, we're living in real time, so we'll see in the coming weeks and months how this will play out. Some of the research I did, I asked some questions to a number of developers, and both male and female gamers, just to get an idea of the different attitudes and different awareness levels of, do they have an idea of what's going on in the industry. So if you were just to have a quick look through this, asking people if they were aware of the in-app tracking that occurs. The majority of female gamers, I know it's a small sample size, but there's enough for a pattern to start showing. The majority of female gamers didn't have, were not aware of what was happening, and also once we explained what was happening, they did agree that there should be more transparency in the industry. And again here, asking if they knew about the changes that were happening, as well as what is your personal view on these things. People always, the female gamers tend to think that there was less awareness amongst them, but also they tend to agree that the changes should be happening, and it is a good way for the industry to be moving. So just to conclude the research, it obviously highlights a need for more female game developers in the research, for a more inclusive industry perspective, but also more research needs to be done on female gamers and why their perspective seem to differ from males. And then lastly, like I mentioned, in the coming weeks and months, we'll learn more how Google will respond to this thing from Apple, and how we'll see it play out. So if I hand back to Andrew, and you want to...
Yeah, just very quickly, we've more or less finished it. So
yeah,
obviously more research needed. We've got to tackle embedded inequality, which is starting out from the school, and we need to correct that in the workplace, in society generally. And clearly we need to boost the number of women in game design, develop pathways potentially from gamer to game designer, and work with game designers to enrich the learning content that in the gaming industry that does exist. And celebrate gaming and game achievements, via public competitions. Make much more of this Gen Z's success in gaming, as opposed to perhaps more traditional forms of educational recognition. So that's where we kind of got to. Obviously keen to get feedback and questions on that, and we can go back. I know we went through that very quickly. Very keen to sort of hear your questions, and we can go back over anything that grabs your interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew and Usman. That's great. And let me hand over now to Dina, who's going to offer some synthesis and critique of the presentation,
yeah.
And a couple of follow-up questions. And after that, we'll be able to throw the floor open to questions from our audience. So thank you, Dina.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Am I allowed to start?
Yes, absolutely, Dina. Did you not hear me introducing you?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. So I'm gonna start. Thank you very much, Andrew and Usman. Thank you very much. This has been really interesting, and it really opened my eyes. I'm an institutional theorist, and this has opened my eyes to many things. My first, I don't want to say critique, but I'm gonna say, I don't know, maybe a food for thought. So the first challenge I'm having is the embedded agency paradox. So we're talking about convincing companies or policymakers, or are we talking about changing the attitudes of children and parents? Because companies' sole purpose is to sell more, regardless of the cost, the social costs and the societal costs. They don't care. And I like the slides about the more inclusivity and diversity, and I have not seen anything talking about the objectification of women, especially in gaming. And I haven't really seen like talking about how women can be less objectified, because if we're all the research talking about children being negatively affected by games is that how they view women, even physically. So I don't know if we're talking about changing the attitudes of families, children, and parents to get the buy-in from them to have girls play more or participate in coding, or are we talking about convincing companies to be, I don't know, less objective towards women? Because that's the challenge I'm having. That's why I'm saying it's an embedded agency paradox. Second of all, I don't think that the policy making portion should be addressed now. It's too early. We still need to diffuse the culture of women in STEM and girls in STEM to start coding, to start designing games, and to, because as you said, the 27% are ready after education to go to STEM fields, and we're not sure if this includes, or how much of this includes, gaming. I have only seen, like, the last 2 months, I've seen like 1 or 2 articles talking about seven women, they're professionals in game design. So I mean, 7, that it's a whole male dominated industry. So maybe this is my first point or critique slash question. Second of all, from a research perspective, from a research point of view, is this a research that is basically telling the numbers and giving us policy recommendations, or is it a research that is drawing our attention to the holes in the current literature? Because basically this is an under-researched field, and definitely lawmakers are going to need years and years to pay attention to this. I don't know if you've seen that the latest, actually, Alexandria Cortez was there. There was some sort of a Congress hearing or something, and Mark was there. And then the guy said that, I don't want my kids to be on social media. I don't know what this and this is. So, and also, there is a YouTube documentary that I strongly recommend. I'm going to share the link right now. It's talking about the social media effects on children. And then you're talking about, I've seen this slide, talking about the positive effects of gamings on kids with ADHD and memory boosting with in the workplace among employees. This is very limited research, and again, it's going to take too long to get the buy-in from company owners and employees until parents. So this is something else to talk about, the positive effects of gaming. But what type of gaming? Because the gaming now is not healthy. It's not healthy. Again, women objectification, violence, and all of this. So I don't know if we are addressing the game makers or the policymakers or the parents, so that the girls maybe one day join the gaming, the gaming design, and then they start to, you know, change from inside. So those are some, I don't know, pointers that I'm having. Is the change going to come from the inside, or as researchers, are we going to like poke holes in it and say this is what's working, that's what's not? Because what I'm really sure of, the companies are not willing to hear any of those critiques from lawmakers unless there is tax involved or there is some PR scandals involved. So I'm talking really pragmatic here. So I don't know if this makes sense. I know that I'm talking about various issues, but I hope that's, am I making any sense? So
yeah, totally. Rebecca, do we respond to that, or is it now open for questions? I'm not clear where we go from here. Hello.
I'm Rebecca.
Dina, let me. Great points. I mean, let me just kind of keep it flowing. I mean, all of those things. I mean, my quick response to that is we didn't mean to gloss over the objectification of women in that, and I think perhaps to our omission of that, we were just referring broadly to the online harms and perhaps a preference for certain games that have a whole series of negative consequences associated with them. And it seems as though women are self-selecting out of those games and choosing other forms of gaming, Minecraft being an example. So I think I think, to your point, I think it's the market signals. So it is perhaps changing the market dynamics and placing much greater emphasis on positive gaming and ensuring that the market responds to that. Now, the public policy can reinforce that by also setting sanctions. So I think it needs all of those things coming in together to create a much more positive ecosystem, and perhaps not only rely upon public policy to protect people. And that's where the notions of citizenship come in, empowerment and other things, being digitally literate, etc., etc. Sorry, Rebecca, I'll leave it there, but that obviously there are many questions to come on that.
Yes, no, thank you. Sorry, I realised I had put myself on mute unhelpfully, as it turned out. So happy now. Thank you for your response there, and thank you, Dina, for your discussant sort of critique. Has anybody got any questions that they would like to put to Usman and Andrew? I can't, but if you raise your hand, I can identify you. Otherwise, post something in the chat. Andrew, I was going to observe that the acronym I was familiar with to describe this particular target group were NEETS, not in education, employment, or training. So obviously these acronyms move around a little bit, don't they?
Yeah. Well, Usman is probably smiling too. I got told off in a presentation where I use NEETS. In fact, I use the word NEET plus because NRS seemed to be a misnomer to start with. It is a rather technical term, and checking around in some of the adult learning industry, the term is not widely understood. It is quite a narrow technical phrase, but it is used by governments and for example trade unions and some city councils, but it's it's hard to get a handle around this because say the idea that they are in training is to some extent a somewhat misleading term.
Yes.
Andrew, can I before we start the questions, can I just ask or maybe comment on one last point? So you're saying that the conclusion of the research or this research or the whole point of us trying to engage this in policy making, you're saying, like, for example, the gamer to gamer design, but is this limited to any context? Is there any contextual like variation here? Are we or is it the cyberspace? Because remember that yes, the games are the same on cyberspace, but the cultures are not. And like in some strict Muslim countries, it's not the same as Asian countries or some Scandinavian. So does this are we linked to one context in trying to encourage more girls in STEM or parents to encourage their daughters to join the STEM or gaming? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd be interested to get Osman. Osman, do you want to have a go at that question?
To be honest, Dina, I think you mentioned before. If we could just go back to the objectifying of women and the other violence issues you mentioned, I think you're focusing quite a lot on a specific genre of games. Like we mentioned before, there's so many different genres now. It's not everything is violent, not everything is objectifying. I do agree with you that it is an issue and it does need to be addressed, and obviously policymakers have to address that and find a way to address it. But in terms of the research, I'm not sure what you mean by gamer to gamer. Could you just explain that? Gamer to gamer design, you mentioned. What do you mean by that?
No, in your conclusion, you say you want to develop pathways from gamer to game designer.
Yeah, so people who have an interest in games, which we've seen a lot of females do play games, but not many of them work in the games industry. So that's what we meant by that.
Part of the backdrop there, Dina, is that part of the mobile technology and things like the Unity platform are dramatically reducing the cost of producing games, and also opening it up to you don't necessarily have to have advanced coding. You have to have some coding and obviously some design. So it's becoming more accessible, and I think that, you know, and it's really getting in there and exploiting that and saying this is a sort of open goal. Let's really encourage more young women to actually start designing their own games. And we can't be far off that almost becoming a game in itself. You know,
does this have to do with the learning content? Because do you think that the learning content will contradict with the entertainment content? What do you think about that?
Again, Usman, you're probably best to answer that in terms of the trade-off.
I mean, it's again, it's a different genre, isn't it? It's the entertainment content obviously tells a story and allows a player to play through, whereas learning content is, I think we're seeing now some corporate companies, they're using games to help train their employees before they go out into the workplace. So for example, I think it was I can't remember the company name, it was one of the pizza companies. They train their staff by creating things in a virtual environment where making mistakes and learning from making mistakes is fine, isn't it? Because in a virtual environment, you're not suffering the real life consequences of whatever it is in their business. So I think the learning content would differ greatly from entertainment and from entertainment content.
It's a great question, and just to build on what Usman said, Dina, I think if you go out there and say it's an explicit learning application, let's say Python or maths or anything, you're only going to attract people who've got volition to learn.
You're right.
One of the commonalities, and great question about the cultural subset here of the NRS cohort, is that they have low volition to learn. They probably came out of schooling with a very negative experience, and that something, you know, learning is something they don't do or don't need. Now, I think there are common cultures right across, you know, the developed world. I mean, you know, it manifests itself differently, of course, but I don't think that's a unique problem to the UK or the US.
I think this is a very interesting avenue for research, because honestly, I mean, someone like me, I'll tell you something. I have ADHD, right? And I've never, as an adult, and I've never heard of this as a coping technique before. And I'm in theory as well. And I think that this is very good. The gamification and applying this in the workplace, or even before joining some sort of a job, especially that now with COVID, everything will be remote. So, and I like the notion of the public competitions, because this will allow more girls and more women to join the game when it's remote. I think Rebecca, there's some connection problem, but Professor Helen has a question. So it's on the chat. So her question is, how do business models vary between the different kinds of games, and how are the profit margins determined? What would the new type of games what would the new type of games be for young women to be profitable? For example, this is a very good question. How would they be profitable?
Okay, so in terms of the business models, you have paid games and you have free games. So the free games, they reach a greater audience, but obviously monetized through ads, as I mentioned in the presentation. So it all depends on how many downloads, how many users you get in terms of how the profit margins are determined. The development costs, obviously, they have to be taken into account. Usually what you tend to find is the free games tend to be more profitable, because people really, the customer attitude, if you like, is more, we wouldn't like to pay. They're more reluctant to pay upfront for a game. They'd rather play it, try it a little bit, and then them free games have in-app purchases inside. So in terms of being more profitable, the free games would be a lot more profitable. To answer your question about for young women, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be, because you have young women who create hyper casual games and have had games published with huge publishers and reached the top 10 of the App Store, and they are very profitable. So it's not saying that young women can only make a certain genre of game. They can make any genre of game. So I don't see that being an issue, to be honest.
Thank you. We've got another comment in the chat from Hanley. who says, I think it's worth noting that a lot of RPGs are trying to be somewhat historically accurate or entirely with Kingdom Come Deliverance, to the extent that they're being used in museum learning content. So this learning isn't limited to STEM fields.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just comment here, there was a game published called Mordecai, and it is a kind of medieval knights and heraldic game, and it was panned by the critics. This is about a year ago, for whitewashing history. That actually it made knights all kind of Aryan and blonde and all of that, and actually we obviously know that the Middle Ages were very different to that and a very different experience. So so it was interesting that back to the comment you made earlier on, Dina, about the industry itself. I think the industry itself is starting. I'm not suggesting there are no problems there. Of course there are. This is early days, and green shoots and all that. I think there is increasing awareness within the gaming industry, that it has to do a much better job of presenting authentic experiences, and so the fact that a game could be put out now with clearly very inaccurate representations of history,
yeah, exactly, exactly,
is significant. So great point, Hannah.
Can I also ask about another aspect of the industry, which is its potential for having a sort of ageist attitude, and this is a subject close to my research heart, and I know that you're targeting what you describe as Gen Z women, so that is a specifically obviously generations are going to shift chronologically, but at the moment these are identified as a young target group. But is there any reason why other age groups who are underrepresented both in users and designers within the industry could not be subject to the same kind of targeting?
Usman, do you want to take that one?
I don't see why not. I don't see why not. I think the same would apply for both. Yeah, I don't see why not. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Andrew. But
well, I think the only comment would be I mean, absolutely, gaming can be used at different age groups, and I think perhaps we need to become more smarter in the way we design games around particular demographics and so on. I think though the issue about employability is to highlight this particular group. So when you are in an older age group, you are likely to have networks and or some form of employment capital to fall back on. The concern about this NRS cohort is that they have very little to fall back on as their jobs become increasingly automated. And we've seen, for example, during the pandemic, and even things like waiting tables has become transformed. We are ordering food on apps, and at most this job is becoming de-skilled, and you're delivering food to a table, for example. So there's acute vulnerability to this. There's about 7 million in the UK, by the way, at the NRS cohort. So it's a large population of people who are in direct line of sight with automation, so there are clearly issues with the older populations too, but somewhat different in dynamic.
Right. Okay. Now we've got some more messages in the chat. We've got something from Aether saying, would you consider video games being a catalyst for therapy orientated innovation?
I think yes, and there's I've read some articles about research being done. There are games as well that I mean, I'm not co-signing and saying that they do help, but there are games that are targeted to people with depression and anxiety. Off the top of my head, I can remember a game called Depression Quest, which is like a interactive fiction game where you're playing as somebody with depression, and they're kind of working through the day-to-day things. So it is, I think there is a possibility there for it, but I do think it needs to be researched thoroughly to make sure it can actually benefit what it's claiming to benefit.
Yeah. If I can just jump in here, I'm looking at a link which I can try and post. It's the FDA have just approved the first prescription video game. It's for kids with ADHD. This is June 15th, 2020. So I had heard that the FDA in the US had approved certain games. The University of Oxford Internet Institute had their research focused on well-being and the potential for creating sort of positive and calming influences. Again, that might be very different from what we might assume to be the case as lay individuals, kind of from an outside point of view. Gaming seems to be anything but calming, but apparently there are forms of games and types of games that do have positive impact on well-being and mental health. So again, fascinating area, much more research needed, but there seems to be some indications that the answer is yes, that it does have potential.
Right. I've just read to the end of this. It was quite a long comment in the chat. How would gaming now develop pathways from gamer to gamer design towards more medical mental health focuses? I don't know if there's anything else you want to say specifically on that, or whether that's covered by your previous answer.
Usman, do you want to talk about sort of community? I mean, it's something around the way you interact as a community, isn't it? I think. I don't know if you want to say more about that. It's
in terms of, you mean in terms of mental health and things like that?
No, sort of gamers and game developers and the way there's sort of an active community of gamers that are very involved in debating games and how games work.
Yeah, so there's many game forums as well as like Discord servers and Slack channels where lots of gamers get together, even game developers get together with them, and there's a lot of community feel about it. So yeah. there are discussions that happen, like you can speak with your players and get feedback directly from them. So if there ever is an issue or whatever, you can just hear it straight from them, and obviously it helps develop better games. Sorry, can I just answer Karina's question? She mentioned it a while ago. I don't think we've got to that. It's in the chat.
See where Karina's question is in the chat.
Shall I just read it out? And yeah, so she's asked, are there any hackathons that aim to develop games for women that we could participate in? Karina, there's things called game jams that they have in the industry. If you just Google game jams, there are ones that are specific to women. I'm pretty sure there's a website called womengamejam.org, and it's basically, it's like you get given like a 3-day time limit, and you get given a theme, and you have to create any game you want within that thing. They do have them for obviously for everyone, but they do have women specific ones as well. So I'm pretty sure there'll be plenty out there if you give it a quick Google.
Fantastic, thank you. Do we have any further questions? I can't see anything else in the chat. I can't see anybody's hands up.
Rebecca, I've just posted that link to the FDA and mental health issues.
Yep. Thank you for that. Is psychological safety a construct that offers any help in this kind of development, do you think?
Do you want to take that, Andrew?
Yeah, can you just say more about that, Rebecca? I'm not sure I understand enough.
Yeah, as a kind of foregrounding for learning.
Yeah.
One of the issues, of course, in sort of workplace situations is that organizational settings can sometimes be very almost hostile to sort of psychological safety of allowing people to kind of make mistakes, learn from them, and kind of learn in a in a safe way. But I'm wondering whether that's an area of great potential for gaming.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think it is, and it'd be interesting to get your comments on this, Usman. I think this is where the notion of control, autonomy, and other things are vitally important. By the way, it's also why this issue of game metrics and telemetrics is so vital, because it is, you can imagine a situation where, you know, somebody gaming is like playing a sport. It's in that highly animated, energized, completely engaged, immersive experience, and it's great, but it's also when you're at your most vulnerable, so there is also a need to create environments. So, for example, in social gaming, making sure you invite people that you want, you know who's online, etc., etc. And this is why I think learning is so closely associated with well-being and safety. But it's where the research, and this is where, as a community of researchers, I think it's so important to put in our thinking caps, how would we research this? How would we gain insight into something that's going on in the moment? And how do we create safe pathways so that, and particularly women, all people get sort of a sense of, I'm being taken care of here, I can control the experience, I can enter and leave the experience whenever I want, and I know what's going to happen to me. I don't know if you want to say more about that, Usman.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the challenge that social media faces as well, because it's obviously, it can be sometimes not a very safe place. People say things that they wouldn't really say in real life. So it's a similar challenge. I think one thing games do tend to have is when you're playing online, they have moderators in the lobbies, if you like. So if anyone is misbehaving, sorry, they get kicked out of the lobby, if you like, and they're not allowed to join that session. But yeah, I agree with you. There is a lot more to be done, just like there is in social media, I think.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Thank you very much for that assessment. It's something I'm quite interested in, because I teach learning and development to our postgraduates. So it's a recurring construct of interest, I think, in sort of acquisition of skills and things. So it's really interesting to have that insight. Thank you. I'm conscious that we're now 1 minute away from 2 o'clock. I can't see any hands up, and I can't see any more questions in the chat. So I think it only remains for me to say thank you very much indeed to Andrew and Usman, and thank you, Dina, for your discussant contributions as well. I don't know if everybody can unmute themselves briefly so that we could give a round of applause to our speakers. Collaborate is so flaky, I don't know if that will work, but if you can unmute yourself and give some applause, that would be fantastic. But thank you both very much indeed.
And my thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for chairing this so well. Thank you, Dina, and thank you, Usman and Andrew. That's great. And also thank you, Isabel, for organising all of this. And thanks everybody that's been part of this experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, everyone.